Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode of the Interventional Endoscopist. I'm your host, Munkaval Sachdev, and today I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Dr. Jason Samarasena as my guest today. He's an interventional endoscopist at the University of California, Irvine. And Jason, welcome.
Man, thank you so much. This is a true honor to be here with you and chat.
So, for those of you who don't know, Jason, as I mentioned, is at the University of California, Irvine, and he started his medical career in the Memorial University of Newfoundland in Newfoundland, Canada. Did his residency itself at the UC Irvine Medical Center, as well as his fellowship and interventional training. So you really got to know the Irvine area really well because you stayed on and you must love it. So in addition to his interventional training, he's done an executive MBA also at the University of California, and he completed that in 2022. And today, you now are the associate chief, the division of GI hepatology, the program director of the Interventional Endoscopy Fellowship, and a professor of medicine. So it sounds like you don't have a lot going on at all. So
no, it's been it's been a great ride, I got to say, with a lot of help along the way, but it's been great. And, this place has treated me really well. And, it's been kind of fun to be at a place where, you've kind of grown up, you've been kind of a baby and, you've been a teenager, you've been through the early adult phase. And now I'm kind of, getting a little older in my career and, being able to sort of give back. So, it's been great.
Yeah. And, as an interventionalist as well, who's had the opportunity to visit your guys' center for different courses and things like that, I do have to say I have EndoLab envy when I go down there. You guys have such a great setup and such a wonderful lab, awesome staff. I think a number of your former techs and nurses have gone on to become industry people who, to go around and teach people how to use different devices and things along that nature. And then just the fact that you guys have that wonderful lab, the pig lab, everything there is just, like I said, I have an EndoLab envy whenever I come to Irvine. So it's a great setup you guys have there.
It's a great place. And it's funny you mentioned that, we're losing yet another one of our great GI techs this week to industry. So, and
you got to stop training them so well.
It's interesting, the relationship we have with industry here is maybe a little bit different than other places. We're very, very open. That's pretty much an open door policy for industry to kind of come in and learn from us and work with us. And I think, when Dr. Chang was here, he sort of set that tone, for the very beginning. And it's really been great for, not only the faculty, but, the fellows as well. And for us, we, it's a mutual relationship, and we learn so much from each other. And I think that's one of the kind of the hallmarks of this place.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you.
No, it's amazing. Also, you mentioned Dr. Chang. We all in the interventional world, we have somebody that we all fanboy after or fangirl after. And, yep. I think that for me, early in my career since 2010, I got to go to a couple of these Vista courses that he was doing. And so he became like him and Dr. Reichman in Houston. The two of them are the guys that I kind of fanboy after when I was still do to a degree, but mm-hmm. It's a great place and probably a great person to learn from too. So, so I chose to interview you because we first met very briefly at the Northwestern Chicago Live course about a year and change ago. And, through my career, before I became an interventionalist and before I was a gastroenterologist, I was a transplant hepatologist. And so while I was a GI fellow and, initially my plan was to go back to transplant hepatology. And I was pretty good at procedures. I had attendings who wanted me to do an interventional fellowship. And so while I was doing that, I was struggling, how do I incorporate liver into an interventional world? And this is early in 2010 when liver biopsy wasn't really, it was like this risque thing to do. You saw a met and maybe you might put a 25 gauge needle in it. And that's about it. And we weren't even thinking about pleural pressure measurements and things along those lines. So your name came up several times when we started talking about endohepatology. And so one of the reasons I wanted to interview you was I wanted to talk about how is endohepatology evolving, and specifically I want to talk about portal pressure measurements, liver biopsies, and anything else that can come out of this in the future, because I do think it's a burgeoning field in the GI space, or at least in the interventional space. And so that's one thing, and that's we met in Chicago, and this was something I wanted to talk about, and here we are. So thank you again for doing this.
No, it's my pleasure.
So before we get started, as you see, and people are familiar with the podcast, I like to try to get to know the interviewee a little bit. And so let's talk a little bit about your background, your family, your childhood. I'll just give you the floor to talk about that for a few moments.
Sure. So I was born in Sri Lanka, and both my parents are physicians. My mom's a psychiatrist, and my dad's a anesthesiologist. And so I think, like a lot of physicians in Sri Lanka, they left Sri Lanka because of the civil unrest, and they moved to England first. So when I was about 3 years old, we moved to England, and then from England, we actually moved to a very small place in Newfoundland, Canada. My dad did a locum as an anesthesiologist, and the place was called Buren. And then after a year, he said, "You know what? Why don't you guys come over here?" I think he, his ultimate game plan was to leave Newfoundland and join his friends in Southern Ontario, where life was great, and it was this was the place to be. And I guess we just got stuck in Newfoundland because my mom came over, and one of the things about Newfoundland and Newfoundlanders are that they are extremely friendly. and so it's very true, what they say about Newfoundlanders. And my sister and I, she's 3 years younger. We had a great childhood growing up, and then we eventually moved into the big city of St. John's, which was 200,000 people at the time. Life was good. Life was good, and there really wasn't a reason to leave. And so my parents are actually still in St. John's, and they're both 75, and they're both still practicing.
That's awesome.
They really love their work and the community there, and it's been great. And I'll put in a little plug. There's anybody that wants to learn a little bit about Newfoundland. There's a Broadway musical called "Come From Away," and it was funny because when I started practice in Irvine as a fully fledged gastroenterologist, there'd be, these really fancy people from Newport Beach that would look me up, and they would say, "Dr. Sam, have you seen the musical Come From Away? It's about Newfoundland." And for years and years, I would have to say, "No, I haven't seen it, but I will get around to it." And then one year it was playing in Orange County, and it's actually about a story surrounding 9/11, where a lot of the planes got diverted from New York, and they landed in this old international airport in Gander, Newfoundland, and it's about the community coming out and just kind of opening up their homes and hearts, and it's a great musical. But in Newfoundland, I went to medical school at Memorial University, where I went to undergrad. And I met a girl in my med school class from California.
Okay.
And so it was, I guess, the summer of second year, where I was debating going on a backpacking trip with my best friend, around Europe, or studying for some awful exam called the USMLE Step 1. So, I decided to, stay in the library all summer and study for that. And anyway, we ended up couples matching, and she did pediatrics, I did medicine. And so that was, I guess it was, it's our 20-year wedding anniversary next year. So, yeah.
It's crazy how the girl always tends to be the reason for a lot of things that we do. So, yeah, I mean, so that's awesome. I mean, so I think back to your parents, leaving probably sometime in the 70s, I would imagine, and they're going from a climate that's literally close to the equator, one of the hottest parts of the subcontinent over there. And then going to Newfoundland, which I've never been to, but I mean, I just think of ice and cold in Canada when it's in the winter. I'm sure the summers are beautiful. I mean, I'm sitting in Phoenix where it's 115 today, and I'm sure like you guys up there have wonderful summers, but the winters have to be very harsh compared to what they grew up with down there.
Yeah, there was the summers are very, very short in Newfoundland. And there was, there was one year where there was there was this kind of funny thing on the TV about like the police that were looking for Summer. Summer had gone missing, and they last seen around spring and fall, but nowhere to be found this year. So the summers can be very, very short, but like August, September, end of July, it's perfect. This is when I go back home to visit. Actually, there a couple of weeks ago.
So both parents being a physician, you being from kind of the same ethnic background that I'm from, and a lot of my guests have been from. So I kind of already know the answers to this, but what were the influences of you becoming a physician as you were growing up?
Yeah. No, I think my parents were actually, fairly okay with me doing other things other than medicine, but I think I've always sort of gravitated towards it. And so, I think when I look at my parents and how much they kind of enjoyed their career, I mean, they're still practicing. I mean, I still can't get them retired, take it easy. So, I think that was definitely a big influence. And, my sister actually ended up doing business first and actually then later on went back to medicine. And so she's a physician as well. She's a family doctor, up in Canada. And, no, I think the parents definitely influenced it. I think, it was a funny thing. So when I moved to Newfoundland, my name wasn't Jason. And you could probably appreciate, people having, somewhat a difficult time with names. So, my first name is, or was Buddhika. And so, after, you can just picture me in like, grade 5 in sort of the small town in Newfoundland. And like every time it's roll call, like when the teacher stops and just like her eyes like, wait, it's like, that's me. Yeah. It's like, that's what it was like. And so, I begged my parents to change my name. And then, I remember like, sitting around the kitchen table with the baby books and baby name books and I remembered I really, really wanted to have the name Anthony. And my dad's like, no, you don't look like a Tony. I was like, so it ended up picking Jason. I like Jason. And then, with what the word means is actually means healer. And so I think my parents kind of gravitated towards that too.
That's great. That's awesome. I mean, because I don't have the exact same story, but it's a very similar story for me. So growing up, I was known as Mike, and to this day, a lot of people still call me Mike. And my name is Muncovel, and my brother was born. I was 4.5, and in the Sikh tradition, in our family, what we do is we go and do a prayer, and then the prayer that comes out, the first letter of that prayer is what you name your child with. So when my dad went to go get the letter for my brother, it came out as an H. And so his name is Harkommel, which is very similar. It's caused a lot of problems for us with our social security numbers and credit reports and stuff like that. But we have very similar names, and we're just like 2 letters off. And both of us have 9-letter first names and very hard to pronounce. And so my dad came back and he said, well, his nickname's going to be Harry or Harry. And I'm like, well, what's my nickname? My dad just kind of looks at me and goes, Mike. And so when I went to kindergarten, they had my real name up on the wall there, and I started crying. I still remember it was first grade, and I started crying, and my mom was like, "What's going on? Why are you crying?" That's not my name, and my name's Mike. And so then they had to go and cross everything out and put it there. And then when I graduated medical school, I tried to go back to my real name. And of course, in my residency program, there was a guy I went to grade school with, and he's like, "Hey, isn't your name Mike?" And everyone turned around and goes, "We can call you that? We don't have to use this long name." And I'm like, "All right, whatever. I'm done. It's fine. Use Mike." So it is what it is. But I can totally totally understand the situation where the teacher pauses and it's like a long pause and you just go, yeah, that's me.
Yeah, exactly.
So
needless to say, my kids have very, very simple names. Andrew,
yeah, same here. Yeah.
it's like, yeah. We're
100%. My daughter's first name is 3 letters.
Yeah.
My daughter's name is 3 letters long. That is it. So,
Okay.
so yeah. So you did residency, and you chose medicine. So what influenced you to do GI during your medicine residency, and then furthermore, what kind of pushed you in the direction of interventional endoscopy?
No, thanks. So I think so at Memorial, there's training in Canada is a little bit different than the US. In Canada, you actually get a long white coat in your 3rd year when you start your clerkship. And the reason why you have that long white coat is you actually function pretty much like the doctor, Okay. And you have a lot of autonomy, a lot of responsibility. And so you're going through these rotations, but what you're actually doing is pretty intense. And on medicine rotations, you're handling a lot of patients. You're reading. You're basically like finding your resident to kind of put in orders. But basically the orders are done, and you're kind of there isn't. It's fast paced. It's a big jump, and I think in the US it's a little different, where the big jump is from like 4th year to intern year.
Yeah. Yep.
But I remember being on surgery rotation and just kind of loving, the OR and loving, all the stuff they're doing, just sort of, the therapy, the technical aspects. And I thought they were, pretty badass. But I remember though, being a clerk in 3rd year, scrubbing in on a thoracotomy, and it was a really big surgery, and they were just sort of like, not taking bathroom breaks, and they were just kind of going at it, and it was just like this big thoracic surgery, and so I just remember thinking, oh my God, I'm just not that intense, I'm just not that, and in retrospect, I'm sure there's a lot of other surgical specialties that weren't as intense, but that was sort of the lens that I was looking at surgery, and I thought, something that was procedural, that, potentially had less lengthy procedures, I think that would be good. And then I met a great GI doctor, who was my first kind of research mentor. His name was Mark Borgonker, and he kind of took me under his wing, and we did some papers together, and, showed me endoscopy for the first time. And ever since then, it was a sort of like, kind of came into UCI knowing that, GI was sort of what I wanted to do.
Okay.
And then,
yeah. Sorry.
When I was a fellow, I wasn't sure about what I was going to do. And I was actually debating between IBD and motility. And one of the really kind of neat things about this program, and this is something that has been going on for a long time, is the 3rd year fellows get to work with one of our therapeutic endoscopists, John Lee, and he was just an absolutely amazing endoscopist, and he just sort of like just makes everything look so easy, and he makes you feel so good about your endoscopy skills, and you kind of do a procedure with him, and he kind of pushes you and gives you autonomy, and then you do things, and you're just like, wow, how did I do that? And so you're talking about fanboying over people. Well, that he was my first man crush, and everybody has a man crush over John Lee. You kind of meet the guy, and you'll kind of instantly want to be kind of like him. So I feel like I've had that man crush forever, and it still ongoing. And as he's my partner. So but he was really totally influential in my decision to become a therapeutic endoscopist, and working with him, and then kind of seeing his confidence in me and that kind of thing. It just really was I remember that night coming home, and I was like, yep, this is telling my wife this is exactly what I want to do. And so so he was kind of a big influence, and still is very much. and then, then of course, I got to know Dr. Chang.
Mm-hmm.
And he, he's kind of been my primary mentor, throughout my career. It's been just a great journey with him, and, the things he's taught me, kind of priceless. And now, honestly, I feel like I'm in a position now with wearing so many hats that I think I draw on, pretty much everything that he's taught me to kind of accomplish things every day.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that's the key thing, that all of us have these great mentors. And I think when I interview people on this podcast, I think it's really cool to understand who the mentors were that got people I should say got people where they are, because most of this is hard work on your part, but this is people who pointed you in the right direction or gave you the building blocks to get to your next step. Because I think if we don't acknowledge them, then, it's just kind of a selfish thing. So I'm glad that, we have that ability to talk about that. So what were some of the challenges you think that you faced early in your career to get, into interventional, or to get into general GI, or in your roles that you're doing now? Like, what are some of the challenges that you overcame, or you kind of saw along the way?
Yeah, challenges. So, I mean, I think, honestly, the one thing that I feel is always a challenge is like pushing myself. And so I remember, actually, this is a kind of funny story. So this is, as a second year fellow, I was trying to make a decision on whether I wanted to go into private practice or do academic medicine. Mm-hmm. And, in fellowship, we have to do a research project. So I was kind of at the beginning of my second year trying to figure out, like, hey, what kind of research project do I want to do? And also, do I want to do interventional endoscopy? And so Dr. Chang, Dr. Lee, and Dr. Muthuswamy at the time, mm-hmm. here, used to host these interventional courses, but they were for fellows. So for fellows that were first or second year or third year, thinking about, maybe therapeutic endoscopy. And I remember they used to invite a lot of the local California attendings to give lectures, do animal lab. It was awesome. Mm-hmm. I remember, in that 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. slot, they were talking about how to make a decision about going to, therapeutic endoscopy. And I remember the conversation turned to notes.
Right.
This was probably 2000 and 2010 or something like that.
Yeah.
And so natural orifice luminal endoscopic surgery. So, and there was a nice little kind of debate going about notes, and, should we be taking gallbladders out through the stomach and all that kind of stuff. And then I remember Roy Sutikno, I don't even know if he knows this, but Roy basically ended the conversation very abruptly, saying, we can't even clean the blanking colon for blanking colonoscopy. And we're talking about notes, and everybody was just startled. They were like, is everything okay? And but then I was like, bowel prep, that might be a good research project. And so the light bulb went off, and then I was talking to another one of my mentors, Greg Albers, who was into this whole bowel prep thing, and Miralax and Gatorade, and so anyway, so ended up doing a randomized controlled trial as a fellow with a Miralax and Gatorade versus go lightly, whole dose versus split dose. It was 4 arms, and it was a big undertaking for a fellow. And then I had to pull my wife into it, because we had to buy the Gatorade and lug it up the up the steps of our condo, and then I'd drive it over to the VA on Monday mornings. And I remember it was just kind of hilarious, now thinking back at what we did to do that study. But anyway, it got published in the Red Journal. Okay. Which was whoa, this is kind of neat. And then people were doing journal clubs on it and texting me. It was just oh wow, this is so it was kind of an early win, Yeah. And it was sort of what, this academic medicine thing could be kind of fun, and I think so I think the challenges have been finding the right challenges to challenge myself with. Okay. And so, but I think that's always something that I've tried to do, and it's still in like the people that I mentor. So yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's really funny that you mentioned notes right now, because this morning I was dropping my son off somewhere, and I was just scrolling through LinkedIn, and Muhammad Othman just posted today about how in 2010 there was a big discussion about notes. I didn't read the whole post, but he put like an article about it and everything on there, and I'm just like, you brought it up like maybe 6 hours later, so this it must be notes day or something. I remember that because after I matched into interventional, or not matched, after I got my interventional spot, one of my mentors was John Martin, and he actually did do, I think, 2 or 3 gallbladder resections with the surgeon at Northwestern using this contraption that fit on a scope that had different arms, kind of like a laparoscope, but they were able to do it successfully. And it was just a few months before I started, so I went in there thinking, hey, he's going to teach me all this stuff, but obviously it died off very quickly, and then nobody was doing it. But yeah, notes is there, though. It's coming. POEM is basically notes, and we're getting into different locations, different areas with it soon. So
yeah.
So when you graduated with from your interventional fellowship, what were the goals you kind of had? And at this point in your career, now that you're 10, 12 years out?
Yeah, 14, I think. Yeah.
Oh, so did you finish in 10?
I finished in, oh no, you're right, 12 years. Okay. Yeah.
Right. So now that you're 12 years out, well, more than 10 years out, and how have those goals changed, and what are your goals now so far?
So, I think early on the goals were almost like understanding the game. What is and understanding kind of what parts I wanted to engage in. And then also figuring out how to balance that with young kids and all that kind of stuff. And so, but I think in the beginning it was really relying on people like Dr. Chang to kind of guide me in the right direction when it came to research, and honestly even like working with industry, and so also like finding my clinical focus at the time, and figuring out was I going to be someone that would kind of like hone in on one area and just sort of hit that really hard, or kind of be someone that would kind of dabble in a few different things, and I think that was something that actually I think Dr. Chang and I kind of disagreed on initially, and he thought you should just kind of like focus on one thing, and I was just so interested in so many things, and then years later he said, what, I'm glad you did it your way. Because there's a lot of cool things going on, and and I can tell that you're engaged in a lot of different things. So and that was sort of helpful for for the division, the fact that we're kind of in multiple zones, and so but I think now the challenges are understanding that I can't do it the same way you did it when 10 years ago, and there's really even more going on, and now it's kind of about mentoring the next generation, building a team, and so really kind of excited about this phase of things, and sort of kind of leading, and that's very exciting to me.
No, and I love that, because I look at that in a similar lens to you. First of all, I think as a mentor, as we age and we get further in our careers, we become mentors, and it's important for us to remember that the field is evolving rapidly. So how we mentor people has to evolve as well, right? So, and back when he was telling you that you got to focus on one thing, when I graduated, roughly around the same time, it really was what I like to call today general interventional endoscopy. It was like we were just doing our EUSs, our FNAs, and we were doing our ERCPs and our cholangioscopies, and maybe, for us early in our careers, the big thing was maybe an RFA, maybe EHL, something like that on the ERCP side, or, Axios had not quite come out in 2012. It came out in 14 or 15, and we're hearing about ex lumina, things like that, but we really didn't have anything crazy. So all of us graduated that era like, hey, I'm just going to be either mainly an EUS guy or an ERCP guy. And between like 2014 till now, I've had this conversation with Tawfiq Kachabi and Raul Panala a couple of times. Like, it's almost like we now have to have subspecialization with interventional. You got to be an endobariatric guy. You got to be an endohepatology guy. You could be a biliary person, an advanced tissue resection person. But the thing is that we're all going to end up having to focus at some point. And what you're doing right now by building a team where you have an interventional team and Dr. X is our, tissue resection person. Dr. Y is our biliary. Now we can all do a little bit of as needed, but we got to have a leader to run that department. And it's exciting because 15 years ago, we would not have been mentored that way. And now we're probably like, hey, you're showing a real good talent in this. I think you should do it 6 months in Japan if you can, for ESD, or maybe you should do some time with Chris Thompson for endobariatrics or whatever the case might be, So I think it's really important that evolution of mentorship is important too. So I love that,
No, you're totally right. I think what you're going to see is sort of like modern day interventional teams are going to be like 5-6 people deep, honestly, and like the volumes are going up and honestly, it's hard to keep up. And so I think, just to kind of touch on training a little bit, I've thought about this, and I think, this sort of the way we're thinking about interventional might be, maybe it's not always going to be this way where you do this sort of like EUS ERCP fellowship for 12 months and, you dabble in a few different areas and then you kind of, do these industry run courses and, you find other ways to kind of, gather these adjunctive skills that you haven't really learned in fellowship. So, one of the things that's, I guess, a little bit unique about our program is this 18 to 24 month program that basically teaches, we try to teach everything that, we can, endobariatrics, endohepatology, third space as well. Because I think you need that like extended time,
right?
To do that. And, but at the same time, I can see, there kind of being these alternate fellowships where like you do like 3 years of Gen GI and then you just do like endobariatrics for a year.
Right.
And then, you don't have to, be able to take out a bile duct stone to, do somebody's, endoscopic sleeve gastroplasty. So, I definitely can see that happening in other areas of interventional also.
Yeah. And I could even argue or see where we go back to what we were doing in the 90s, where GI, similar to Canada, is a 2-year fellowship in general GI. And now if you want to be that IBD expert, then you do a 1-year IBD. If you want to be a therapeutic, you do that 1-year interventional therapeutic fellowship, which might just be EUS, ERCP, and maybe some other basic skills. And then you do your 4th year, or at that point would be your 4th year in whatever subspecialty of interventional you want, or 6 months, whatever the requirement might be. One may say for sleeves, do you really need a full year of doing them? Maybe. It depends on your volume, but if you're in a high volume center, could you get all you need out of it in 3 to 6 months? Maybe, and tissue resection, you probably do need a year of good mentorship to really be comfortable taking out these large flat lesions on the colon or different parts of your body. But yeah, I think we're going to see a big evolution in the next 5 years, because the amount of growth that we're seeing in our field compared to what it was when you and I graduated, it's evolving very rapidly. So
it's funny you mentioned that in a couple of things. I mean, like interventional radiology has sort of been like that too. You don't have to do this like big long general radiology residency and then follow it up with interventional. They're sort of shifting, the years more towards interventional and less with general. And I think that kind of makes sense. And I remember talking to Rob Haas about this, and he talked about the days in the 90s when it went from a 2-year fellowship in the US to a 3-year fellowship, really to learn ERCP when we were teaching ERCP to all 3rd years. And so now, that's no longer the case, but the fellowship is still 3 years. So I think it does make a lot of sense that we maybe think about going back to 2 years. And it's funny you mentioned Canada, because I train Canadians. We're on our 3rd and 4th Canadian trainee right now, and their 2 years of Gen GI. I really don't notice any difference between like a 2-year trained Canadian fellow and a 3-year trained US fellow. So I think you can get it all done in 2 years. And their board exam is really, really tough. So
yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of the general GI fellowships that are 3 years long, a lot of the high-end, quote-unquote, university programs do require 6 to 8 months of research in that 3 years, and they're not really doing more than maybe a couple scope days a month in that time frame. So, I mean, maybe they're getting 1 scope day a week, but the rest of the time they're supposed to be doing their research and their projects, and that's it. And that's important. That's also definitely very needed for academic careers. But that tells you that the clinical subject matter that you're working on, you don't need the full 3 years for that. You probably only need 2 years, and then the extra time, if you want to spend it doing research or should do it, that's a completely different discussion and debate. But I think clinically, we probably don't need more than 2 years, especially if people are going to start to subspecialize. But
yeah, totally.
So let's kind of get into, let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about, we'll start talking a little bit about endohepatology. So let's kind of talk about your journey in endohepatology. And I know that it seems like it started a lot with portal pressure measurements, and you started that early in your career before, you took on these new roles. And some of the initial papers and videos that are out on Video GIE and YouTube and other places, you're one of the lead authors of those. So let's go back to the portal pressure measurement, endohepatology, liver biopsy. Let's just kind of do that and talk about the future of that as well. So
awesome. Yeah, no, I mean, I think, this has been a great story, like just an awesome story. And so, privileged to be kind of, part of it from essentially the very beginning. We, when I was a junior faculty, Dr. Chang used to do these animal labs, with Cook Medical, and it was sort of honestly on like an every 3 month, there'll be like another animal lab, and honestly, that's one of the things that I thought was just an amazing part of training with him and here, is the fact that you can really just sort of like just open up your mind and just, work with engineers that are like so smart, from these companies, and just sort of like really think about like completely kind of off the wall ideas. And then, the next one in 3 months, we're looking at a prototype and we're kind of figuring this out. It's like, that is honestly a dream of mine to kind of restart that process here. So I think it'll be great. But one of the projects was, looking at, basically manometric measurements in veins and arteries. And so we, did a series of animal experiments, and I was privileged to like design some of those. And it was pretty easy to access the portal vein, pretty easy to access the hepatic vein. But we did manometric measurements in arteries, in this porcine model as well. And it seemed like, initially we were, using needles with basically interventional cardiology wires, manometric wires. And then on a EUS, we could see some like blood clots forming on the wire as we're kind of making these measurements. And we're like, this is probably not the right way of doing things. So we got nervous about that. So then we thought about, a different sort of design, and the design that we looked at was essentially, the design of the Insight system that, Cook Medical got FDA approved in 2020. And so, it hasn't changed, really that much since that original animal lab, honestly, and 25 gauge needle. And so I remember calling a friend of mine in interventional radiology who was a resident at the time. It's like, hey, can you come down with your equipment, and we're going to just, do these needle measurements, and we're going to get you to do the measurements, transjugular with the balloon catheter. And lo and behold, like the measurements were like spot on, what he was measuring and what we were measuring. It was like super exciting moment in the GI lab. I remember just like looking at everyone like, and just smiling. It's like, so cool.
Yeah.
And everybody was just like, wow, this is going to be good. So, and now, fast forward, we did, the original human studies, and initially, all you could do is really correlate, these pressures with clinical evidence of portal hypertension, varices, in the esophagus, stomach, portal hypertensive gastropathy, maybe some thrombocytopenia. So we did that, and, in the initial kind of human experience of like 28 patients, and it showed very good correlation. And then we did a large multi-center study that Jennifer Kolb at UCLA is going to be first author on, over 400 patients, and multiple, great sites that contributed to that work. And we just resubmitted that. And then, Harshit Kara has done other kind of multi-center work and others as well. But, and I think, the kind of the message from all of this is extremely safe, almost no complications. Cook also did a sponsored prospective trial called a Portal Study, looking at that manuscript as well as 70 patients, international multi-center. And, from all of the retrospective and prospective work, it looks like this is a very, very safe procedure. The questions that have come up, with portal pressure are, is it as good as the gold standard, which is HVPG with interventional radiology? And so now there's some sort of correlative studies, and there's some small, studies. One was about 9 patients, from China that was in GIE that looked at HVPG and EUS-PPG, and the correlation was, pretty much spot on.
Right.
And so I think, but doing all of this, this kind of fancy EUS work, the question is like, well, who really cares? And, if the hepatologists don't, find it helpful, then, is it, even that important? And so that's been the really interesting part, to see the evolution of how hepatologists have felt about this. And I remember when I went to UEGW and I presented this like first human, trial of, EUS-PPG, and I remember hepatologists like stopped me in the hallway and just basically accosted me and said, "You need to stop doing this research right now. Putting needles into livers, it's like, it's a terrible idea." And it's like, and it was like, wow, I was really surprised, and so, and now, in 2023, we got like the best of DDW at AASLD, for this multi-center thing. So I think, the hepatology community have kind of, I think, slowly learned more about, this procedure, and I think they're understanding it more. And I think the fact that I think they're appreciating how safe it is.
Right.
And we have 2 hepatologists here, Adrian Hu and Harry Wen, who are now very much, advocates for this, because they know it's safe. And, the measurements that we're getting are, I feel, extremely, extremely accurate. And we've sort of, outside of, the things that, you've seen published, we've done sort of other, kind of internal studies, we'll say, to really like prove like the validity of this, test. And I feel like, now we're, the next part and kind of Marvin Yu's working on this, sort of like a structured protocol for, these measurements. So we're all kind of doing it the same way. We're all getting consistent results. But then also understanding how, PPG, with EUS-guided measurements we may have to kind of almost rewrite the HVPG story. Some hepatologists feel that HVPG with the indirect measurements of the portal venous pressure may not be the gold standard. And actually EUS-PPG may actually be the gold standard because we're getting direct pressure readings. Right. And to hear that from, like 2 very prominent hepatologists, at DDW this year, kind of got me excited, because they're like, you guys need to stop, comparing PPG to HVPG, because we think HVPG has tons of issues. And if you see these HVPGs being done, the tracing, I think the reason why they require tracings is because, you're seeing this fluctuation.
Right.
with PPG, you just don't get a fluctuation. It might like go from like 8 to 9 to 8 to, it's like,
yeah.
And so, so I think, there are hepatologists that are now, kind of supporting the use of, these pressure readings even over, what the interventional radiology measurements are. So I think, an exciting time, with this. I was just informed that we landed a big industry grant to study EUS-PPG and other endohepatology related things. It's a 4-year registry. It's going to be multi-center. There's 12 research questions within them. So like 12 different subgroups of liver patients that we're going to answer, questions around. It's super exciting. So, I think this is it's in and of itself. I think the work has been great, but I think it's with PPG, but I think it's been in combination with other things with endohepatology that have also kind of really matured and have become really refined, like EUS-guided liver biopsy. I mean, I think right now, there's, both of our hepatologists absolutely prefer EUS-guided liver biopsy over IR-guided biopsies at our institution. And, the volume of these cases just, keeps growing and growing and growing. But now IR doesn't get any of the liver biopsies if we can do this EUS-guided. And so, speaking of, video GIE, so this month's video GIE on the cover is our latest technique on how to do an EUS-guided liver biopsy. It's called the dynamic suction technique. And it's just phenomenal. Like what we're getting in terms of, median complete portal tracts is like 24. We're getting, at least 6 centimeters of liver core. We're using 19 gauge FMB needle, and this technique is so simple. It's like, it's just a simple modification to what everyone's been doing. And and it makes all the difference. And, essentially just taking off the syringe on the first pass and, before the initial puncture and then, but yeah, check out the video. It's really excellent.
So when you, dynamic suction, or what's the term you use? Is it?
Yeah, it's dynamic suction. Yeah.
I think I remember hearing that term. I don't know if it was something where you pull back when you advance and then you let go of it. Is that how?
So this is essentially, we have 20 cc's of suction on a heparin prime needle.
Okay.
So it's wet.
Right.
And then before puncturing through the stomach, we actually take the syringe off.
Okay.
And then we puncture.
Okay.
Then we attach the syringe back on.
Right.
And we open suction, close suction. So 2 seconds of suction. Okay. Then you pull back the needle while you're about 1 centimeter away from the liver capsule. Then you open suction, throw, close suction, pull it back.
Okay.
And then the third one, same thing. Open suction, throw, close suction. And that's the technique. And the biopsies have just been completely different.
Yeah, I used to do something similar. So I use heparin, and what I'll do is I'll puncture in with a 19 gauge, and then I'll turn on the suction. So the new thing, I'll try this, is where you take it off, like you're saying, and put it back on. But I'll turn it on, advance, turn it off, pull back, advance. But the thing I used to do early in my career, and it was before we were doing liver biopsies, I'd go into the pancreas, and I would puncture in. And I would have a saline syringe, like, a 10 cc saline syringe on the thing that I had pushed some saline through. And I do this really weird thing where I'll hold the scope with my forearm against my chest. And I will, with my left hand, I'll hold the needle. So I'm basically holding the scope with the needle, by the needle, and then just supporting it with the handle onto my chest. And I have my other hand on the syringe. So as I pass through, I would pull back on the syringe, and then I would let go, pull it back out, and then do like that. And I was getting really good results that way. But, like I said, being in private practice and just kind of trying different things to see what works, but never studied it. So I don't know if it was good. But I do believe, like, having intermittent suction works better. So that's good to know. I'll definitely put a link to it on the podcast notes. So for anybody who's interested in checking it out. How do you guys clean out your specimens? Because I remember when you probably started when Ken was doing these things, he was getting 2 little 18 gauge needles on a petri dish and pulling out yellow cores and telling everybody that this was a core. And because you respect him so much, like, oh yeah, it's a core, but you're not really sure yourself because you think it's a clot. So what do you guys do to clean it out? Do you use like that core catcher, or what is it that you're doing to clean out your liver biopsies?
Yeah. So, it's funny. And this is where just collaborating and, getting out there and showing stuff. So yes, exactly what you described is what Dr. Chang was doing with the 2 needles and kind of pulling them apart. And then I have to give credit to John Pineda, who's interventionalist, and I met him in Roanoke at the RISE conference, and then he was telling me about what he's doing, and actually I've adopted his method, which is when the specimen comes out, you basically put everything onto a gauze, and so you basically take the gauze and put it, where you got the specimen, and everything sort of comes, on the gauze, and then you just get a Q-tip, and then you just touch the liver specimen and you start turning it, and it's amazing. It's like that the liver core will actually separate from the clot.
Oh.
Yeah, and so when he was explaining it to me, I was like, yeah, let's see how that works, and then he sent me a video, and then we've done it over like the last couple of months, and it's been like fantastic.
I'm going to try it because I do about 5 liver biopsies a month, so I'll give it a shot. I'll also do a plug for my method, which I have a video on YouTube about it. But basically, have you ever seen the Microtech polyp traps? The ones that look like a top, so it's got a little disc and then it's got 2 kind of. It's just a small little round thing about the size of a quarter.
Okay, no, I don't think I've seen them.
So it's a polyp trap that you use for colonoscopy, and it's got 2 halves. It's got a plastic grate in the middle. So it's a filter. So I separate the halves, and there's one that's got a long silicone or rubber end to it. I put that away. I throw that away, and I take the other end, and it's lure lock. So I screw it on to a 10 cc saline syringe, and then I push about 2 cc's into the trap, and I dump my entire specimen into that puddle of water. And then I'm holding it, and I just pull the trap up. So basically, I'm pulling the plunger out, but the plunger's on the table, so I'm holding it secure. So I'm pulling the trap up, so it aspirates all the water and blood into the syringe, and all that's left is biopsy core. And then I take a Q-tip, pick it up, drop it into specimen, and it's a bloodless yellow long core that just sits there. So I'll send you the video after we're done. And
I just sent you John's on your WhatsApp.
Oh, cool. I'll check it out. Good. That's awesome. Okay, so what's the future of endohepatology? Do you see us doing TIPS procedures with axial stents, or what do you see us doing down the road?
Yeah, so I mean, I think so. I think what gets encompassed in endohepatology right now is EUS-PPG. EUS-guided liver biopsy. We are doing a lot of EUS shear wave elastography. So we did some of the original work on that. Now we're a part of a 4-center prospective study with Olympus that's going to be studying that in a lot of detail. And so I think that is something that's interesting. And in fact, Harry called me on Friday and saying that I wasn't sure how closely he was paying to my shear wave measurements, on these reports. And he's like, Jason, there's something weird going on. Like the liver biopsy is not correlating with your shear wave measurements. And I'm like, Harry, are you saying that like every time that we do this, the liver biopsy correlates with the shear wave measurements? He's like, yes, this is the first one that hasn't. And I was like, okay. And so, anyway, we talked about the case and I think there was probably a pretty good reason why the shear wave wasn't, but I think this is kind of interesting. I mean, our hepatologists are interested in knowing, what the shear wave elastography measurements are. I mean, if they're getting a liver biopsy, I think that's obviously kind of the gold standard. But but I think there's, patients with, maybe reasons maybe not to do a liver biopsy where like this may be a kind of a a test to confirm or refute kind of what's happening on the fiber scan, which is sometimes, inaccurate. So,
Right.
and then outside of shear wave, I think EUS-guided, I like coiling and
Right.
glue, is another kind of very therapeutic aspect of endohepatology. But, I think, the future really is probably just getting awareness out to the hepatologists, and for them to understand, at least on the diagnostic side, getting the word out to the hepatologists. And I think there's more and more of the hepatology community that's kind of accepting this. And now it's I gotta say going really well. So on the therapeutic side, so EUS guided tips. I think there's I think there's that adage, just because you can doesn't mean you should. So I wrote an editorial for a pretty wild paper, from a Chinese group in GIE that had done some kind of wild stuff, and I think that was my message. It was sort of, just because you can doesn't mean we should. Yeah. Let's till we figure things out.
Yeah.
I was actually, speaking of Roanoke, there was Varun Kassar was we did a live case together, and he was showing me that he can like consistently get a view where you can see kind of like right portal vein branch in segment 4 and the left hepatic vein. And so he does what's called a one stick PPG. So he basically hits the portal vein branch first, gets the 3 measurements, and then he just continues to push the needle till he gets to the hepatic vein, and he does this kind of one stick PPG. And so ever since Roanoke, I've been looking for that, and I'm gonna the one stick is cool, but somebody said that when you have the needle in, it almost looks like the olive with a toothpick going through it. So we call it the martini stick.
Okay.
And so and I was just curious to see how many cases can we actually achieve that view, and It's essentially almost all of them. So it makes it interesting. It brings up an interesting discussion that, okay, if you can basically get a needle, going from the portal system into the hepatic venous system, could you, bridge those two?
Right.
So I think, Chris Thompson did did one tips in a pig, a long time ago. And I don't know. It's certainly something that we can start thinking about, because anatomically there is a location where you could potentially do this.
Yeah, and if Ron is listening or watching this, he needs to put a video GIE thing out quickly, because anybody else watching or listening to this is probably going to come out in a few weeks. So yeah, so no, but that's actually fascinating. I think, like you said, just because you can doesn't mean you should, but eventually we're developing these tools. I mean, if you think about it, not that I'm advocating this and it's definitely off label, but an axial stent would be this kind of right type of stent to do that. Obviously you have to be very precise, and we have to have studies, and completely not advocating that we do this today, but it's something down the road that endoscopic tips might look like an axial stent sitting in the liver somehow, but you have to have the right approach, and you have to have the right angle, and obviously you have to have safety testing and everything. And to kind of piggyback a little bit on the hepatologist, I tend to get frustrated with some of the hepatologists I work with in the Valley, because they won't refer for liver biopsies, and they won't refer for portal pressure measurements. And I forget that interventionalists are kind of built a little bit different than hepatologists are. A lot of us are always thinking, what's the next great thing? You're certainly an example of that. You get in the pig lab, you kind of see, how can we do this better? What we're doing today, how can we do it differently? And I'm not saying that all hepatologists, but a lot of the house of medicine in general is very comfortable with how we've always done stuff, because try and true is the best way to do things. And it's a little bit hard to convince people in that mindset that, hey, we have a different way of doing it. And if you go back to 15 years ago, we could have done liver biopsies then. And a lot of people say, well, just because you can, you shouldn't. And I think as we develop safe techniques and people like yourself and other colleagues show that things can be done safely, we'll see that grow. So I'm excited to see that, but I'm also happy to hear that ASLD and the meetings you've been to, that the hepatologists are now starting to come around, because that will then trickle down to the people that I work with in the community who are naysayers for these type of technologies. So it's exciting.
Totally. And so, I like this year, I'll go to AASLD, and then, if you told me like 5 years ago that, you would be going to AASLD every year, it's like, okay.
Yeah.
That's, one of our fellows, and this is interesting. So Andrew is like a kind of an amazing guy. He did GI fellowship for 2 years, and then he did his pilot program at Emory where he can do transplant in his third year.
Okay, I've heard of this. Yeah.
And then now he's our interventional fellow. So he's interventional trained, and so he is kind of the product of this field that we started. And so he's sort of somebody that, could see that, like, okay, this is interesting, like I want to be a hepatologist. I want to do the diagnostic things, but I want to be kind of, on the therapeutic side of things as well. And, this field really kind of marries, these parts together. And I think you're going to see more like hepatologists, going to interventional fellowship to kind of learn these techniques, because I feel like it's a perfect complement to their clinical care. So,
yeah, exactly. I mean, that's one of the reasons I got interest in these, like liver biopsies and portal pressure measures, because of my background in liver. But the thing is that it's going to be a hard specialty to do in the community. I'm seeing that firsthand. You've got to be affiliated to a transplant center or a hepatology center of excellence, because that's where the patients are for these type of procedures. So I definitely think that, if you're going to be an endohepatologist, you can try to do it in the community and you can do some basic things. But if you want to really, really do it, you got to be affiliated to some type of transplant center. And I think that's going to be the take-home message for most endohepatologists. But it's definitely a field that is going to grow and needs growth.
And what I will say is you only need one hepatologist that believes you. It doesn't matter where you are. If he's like, we were in an academic center, and it was actually hard to convince our hepatologists here, initially, that yes, our liver biopsies are better, and in their defense, they weren't better. I think they were kind of like, we didn't really quite have the technique down. We didn't have those new needles, and now it's a different day, and now they'll be the first to admit, no, this is definitely better. And then also with the portal pressure stuff, it's like, this is definitely safe. And so, but yeah, it only takes one hepatologist, Harry is keeping me so busy with these referrals. It's great. Yep.
So we spent a lot of time with that stuff. I also want to give you an opportunity to talk about some of the things that you're interested in. And before we got on to the podcast, we talked a little bit about innovation. We talked about AI, mentorship, advanced resection. So I will give you the floor again. Let's talk about those things that, that interest you as well, so that we can kind of get them out there.
No, thanks. I mean, I think, I kind of started, you asked a great question about, what's been the challenges for you. And I think, I think for me, it's always been, pushing myself to do different things. And so one of the things I'm, very proud of is, the work I've done with industry. I think, being a consultant, a medical advisor, a speaker, all of those things have really, I feel, helped me, honestly, be a better researcher and be a better clinician and be a better mentor. And I think that was all sparked by, essentially watching Dr. Chang kind of engage with industry and do the things that he did in this portal pressure story, to see something that we were, tinkering with in the animal lab and see it grow to something that's, available globally and, just, doing great. and really helping patients. It's just been that's been a great kind of highlight for me. But definitely wasn't afraid of engaging with industry, and then had the opportunity to co-found a company called DocBot with Bill Carnes, who is my colleague here at UCI, and that was just sort of another level of sort of engaging with industry, because now you're sort of the entrepreneur and you're trying to kind of navigate things, and so being on that side of industry was a great experience for me. And it's when you're kind of going around to the booths at DDW, and then you see Jason Samarasena behind the booth at one of the booths, it's like, okay, that's kind of interesting. So we had a booth at DDW. We were a computer vision algorithm startup that focused on colonoscopy and also upper GI procedures. And so we kind of grew that company for 6 years, and it was just a phenomenal experience. But one of those jobs that you couldn't like turn off. So, it's like when somebody wanted to talk, doesn't matter what time zone, it was like, your cell phone was always on, and you're always kind of responding to emails and, having meetings. And so, but just a fantastic experience with a fantastic team. We ended up selling the company to Satisfy Health, which is a larger AI company, like Burns Company, and so a lot of the technology kind of lives on with him, which is awesome. But the reason why I kind of mentioned that is I think with this field of interventional endoscopy and interventional endoscopy, you really do have opportunities to do this kind of thing, and whether it's the there's different kind of phases of innovation, we'll say. What we did with DocBot was very, very kind of like raw from the ground up, entrepreneurial, to the max. But then, there's other kind of ways to engage with industry. You might be a consultant on a project where, they'll ask for your advice. You'll be in the, animal lab working on things, that's another, kind of phase. And, and then, you might just be, going to kind of a medical advisory board meeting and talking about and discussing things. That's sort of another level of engagement. But I think one of the things that I've been fortunate to see in my career, even as short as it's been, is a lot of wins when it comes to working with industry. And so one of the things that I try to promote with kind of my junior faculty and trainees is making those connections early, because it really has added a lot of color to my daily life and weeks and months of this sort of very, very kind of busy and time-consuming job, but those sorts of projects really give me so much joy, and I think and you could probably appreciate that too. These types of projects really are what kind of gets me up in the morning and kind of gets me excited. Yeah.
Definitely working with the industry is absolutely important for interventionalists, and I think it keeps you fresh. I mean, there's only so many. We talk about the cool stuff in these podcasts, but the average day-to-day interventionalist is doing a lot of, I wouldn't say mundane, but a lot of routine procedures. Maybe the routine EUSs or routine ERCPs, but you do need to get exposure to new ideas, new concepts, and by being somebody that industry relies on, you get to see what the future of your field is ahead of time, and you get to participate in molding the future, which I think as we get into our careers, that's really your legacy, is kind of being able to leave something back, And speaking of that, molding the future, you also wanted to talk a little bit about mentorship. So what was some of the things you wanted to talk about? You're a program director of a fellowship. Our fellowship is on not suspension. That sounds like we did something wrong. We have internally suspended because we don't have enough faculty at the moment. But, as a program director, what's some of the things that you really impart amongst your trainees?
Yeah. So the mentorship thing, for me has been, kind of almost like foundational from like the very, very beginning. And I think, and a lot of mentorship comes from, working with, students on research projects. But, the AG actually had me give a talk on mentorship at DDW this year. And so I actually had to really kind of like, think about this and, why you're doing it and, what's important. And the interesting thing was, it was about medical students, residents, and fellows. And because I think, they knew that I mentor, a lot of people, not just fellows. And so, and then I was looking back and I think, there's actually like high schoolers, there's undergrad students that are Bio 199 students in our UCI program. There's people in their gap year, and I have a kind of a gap year mentoring program. And then residents. And then also I mentor international medical graduates. And so I'm on my third international medical graduate and sort of, very rewarding when you can, help somebody leave their home country and, basically get training and, sort of kind of like my parents' story. And so, and so now, fellows, advanced fellows, and now junior faculty. So there's sort of a large kind of spectrum of kind of mentees that, I'm kind of helping. But I think, one of the things that, we've set up, at least on the research side, is, we have weekly meetings with Microsoft Teams, and we have everything, all the research set up on Teams, and we're writing manuscripts together using like live documents. And there's another app that I use called Trello, which is sort of a kind of an app on the phone and the desktop that basically I can have a list of things that the mentee is working on. It's live, and then that mentee can also have that list. And so when I meet with a mentee, I can kind of pull up the list and see what they're doing, what they've done. Because sometimes, when you mentor a lot of people, you actually forget what they've done. When you're writing their letter, you're like, what did we do together? And then it's like, and then, then they summarize everything. But this is helpful for kind of monitoring that as well. But kind of funny story. So one of my mentees in 2014 was a guy. He was a medical student, and I had a really great kind of mentorship experience with him. And one of the things that I always talk about is what I learned from my mentees, because so we actually had a mentee that learned meta-analysis. I said, I don't know how to do meta-analysis. You, as a second year internal medicine resident, learn it well. And there was another faculty that, helped him do that. And then he brought it back to the group. And then we did a meta, and it got published in GIE.
Right.
And so now we've published a lot of metas and stuff, but that all started with that resident.
Yeah.
And then so, mentees can really be helpful, and kind of, grow your own kind of, personal development. But this medical student actually taught me how to do something called iBooks, which were kind of patient-facing, almost like an interactive PowerPoint that you give a patient on the iPad. So UCI med students are really big into iBooks. They have an iBookathon or iBook challenge where like they come up with their best iBook and in all different disciplines. But he focused on GI, and we did this one on Barrett's and GERD and endoscopy. And anyway, it paid off for me again because I got this like top doctor award or something like that, and the iBook thing was listed as one of the things. But that med student that I mentored ended up hooding him at his med school graduation, and his name was Christopher Pyge. And then he ended up going to Hopkins for residency and UCLA for GI and interventional GI. but he's actually joining me as faculty now next month. And
That's
so
awesome.
so it's kind of like cool how,
Absolutely. Congrats to both of you on that. I mean, that's it. As a mentor, your mentee's success is your success, and vice versa. So, I mean, that's congratulations to both of you guys. I mean, that's just amazing right there. So,
I'm super excited to be working with him again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jason, I think on a Sunday I've taken up a boatload of your time, but I really, really appreciate you spending the time with me today. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about before we kind of?
No, I'm sorry. I kind of went on and on rambling.
No, this is amazing. No,
I really enjoyed this, and I really kind of appreciate what you're doing, and you are you're someone in our field that is someone that we're also comfortable with, and that doesn't, you can't really say that about everyone, but we just kind of appreciate how you are, and the kindness and generosity, and you're really I feel like selfless, and so thank you for this. This is great.
Thanks for saying that. I appreciate that. But no, I thanks for your time. And before we sign off, just a couple quick things that you may have heard. But I encourage everybody listening to this podcast or watching it, join your societies, whichever one resonates with you, whether that's AGA, ACG, ASGE, FIGHT, ASLD, whatever it is. Just join a society, make a change, participate. A lot of what we do, a lot of what Jason's doing with portal pressure measurements is not being reimbursed right now. So unless you participate in your societies, there's not a real, we could get the hepatologist to agree to do this procedure, but then we need to be able to get people to pay for it so that we're not spending $2,000 on a needle or whatever the cost is and not getting paid. So definitely participate with your societies. Be a voice to help grow your field. And if you're struggling with any issues with mental health, please reach out to a friend, psychiatrist, to better health, whatever it is. But, we all live in a very stressful world with stressful lives, and we got to keep ourselves centered and focused. So definitely reach out and get help if you need it. So Jason, once again, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. And, we'll meet each other at a conference pretty soon, I'm sure. So
sounds awesome.
All right. Thank you so much.
Bye. Take care.
All right. And that is it. So I'll hit the stop recording button. And so.
Please hit that like button and that subscribe button.